All right, welcome to the Convergent Impact Leadership Podcast, where we explore real stories of leadership and the strategies to improve your own leadership capacity. My name is Eric Savickas, and I am an Army veteran with over 30 years' experience in leading and teaching and training leadership. I'm your host today and excited to be with you. Today, I'm thrilled to have Sterling Folden with us. Sterling is the Deputy Chief of Operations at Mountain View Fire Protection District here in Colorado. Sterling's got over 30 years experience in the fire service, and his journey has taken him from firefighter to innovative leader at the forefront of fire service operations. He's a strong believer in pushing boundaries while keeping safety and risk paramount. His leadership was pivotal during the response of the Marshall Fire in 2021, which we'll talk about today. And we're going to dig into his story, hear his thoughts on leadership, and learn about the lessons he's picked up along the way. Sterling, thanks for joining us today. It is a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to be on your show today.
All right, let's dive in. So let's start with your path through the fire service and your leadership journey. How did you get attracted to the fire service initially? And what was that journey like going from your first department, which I believe was Cherryvale Fire, to where you are now as Deputy Chief of Operations at Mountain View?
Yeah, good question. I had never actually considered anything to do with the fire service at all. I was on a path to be a commercial airline pilot was what I figured I wanted to do. But early in high school, the local volunteer fire department sent out a flyer, and the headline on it was, "What if you called 911 and no one came?" And so that's really what piqued my interest to get involved in the fire service. I think my parents felt that was a good way to try to keep me out of trouble. It was interesting to me, and it was just down the street. So I went and applied. They had a program for what they called apprentice firefighters, and that was for people that were between 16 and 18. And you could join the fire department and volunteer. The only thing you couldn't do was drive anything or go into a burning structure for those 2 years. So that's kind of where it all began and what piqued my interest in it. And then as we progressed through, the volunteer department I was with started to mature as well, and they started hiring career people. I was fortunate enough to be hired on the initial kind of offering of career firefighters for them, which was actually, looking back at it, a great deal because we were able to do a lot of different things. We were small departments. Not only was I a firefighter, but I was a driver operator. I would sit in the officer's seat, and we would just kind of rotate those roles around. So we were getting a lot of experience doing things that we'd never experienced before. We started with 2-person crews, which sounds shocking these days, but that's what we had. And then as I progressed through the career, I kind of, I climbed through the ranks there. I sought promotion. I did a short stint at the larger city department next door to us for a few years, but I was always part-timing at Cherryville as a fire prevention person part-time while I worked at the city of Boulder. And then I switched back to Cherryville full-time when there was some leadership roles that came open as at that time, it was called the assistant chief, which is now what they would have called the deputy chief. And that's kind of what springboarded me into doing this career for 30 years. It's been a great ride so far.
So when you first joined, was leadership and promoting through the ranks on your mind at all? Or was it, hey, I'm just going to do this thing and I like the role of being the guy on the ground and doing the hard work of being a firefighter, not even thinking about promoting? I know in the military, with my experience, there are certainly folks that enlist and then through their path, they go to officer candidate school or some other program where they promote and become an officer. But for many, becoming an officer is the beginning of your path, like it was mine. I went through an RTC program, got commissioned as an officer straight away after graduating from college, and leadership was the thing that was at the forefront. And I know things are different in the fire service, but were you even thinking about leadership back then?
16 years old, I was not thinking leadership at that point. But early on in the career, give me 4 or 5 years, I kind of naturally was seeking out more responsibility and kind of those realms. And when I went through Fire Academy for the city of Boulder, I remember they asked the question at one point towards the end of the academy, who eventually wanted to be a fire chief. And I raised my hand for that. I don't think I understood what that really meant at the time when I rose my hand for that, but it seemed interesting. I had always enjoyed challenges and responsibilities, so I think what kind of interested me to raise my hand. But like I said, I'm not really sure I understood what was truly involved with raising my hand at that point.
I'm picturing the folks in that formation with you when they asked you to raise your hand if you had interest in being a fire chief, and then you doing it, and the people to your left and right saying, what are you doing? Right? Like I was taught in the military, never raise your hand for anything. But
Yeah, I
did that
was the
play out how you thought it would?
It did. I was the source of many push-ups for myself in the academy, and then became the source of push-ups for everybody else in the academy at points as well. But there was only a couple of us that raised our hands in that academy, and yeah, everybody kind of had a stunned look on their face, like, "You're crazy. What are you doing? Don't raise your hand, and don't admit you want to do that." But it was too late at that point. My hand was high in the air. So
Yep. And then you were in the front leaning rest position shortly after that, I
yes,
assume,
yes,
with them saying pain is the weakness leaving the body.
yeah, there were all sorts of great sayings that they had
Yeah.
for that. Yeah.
So as you progressed through your time at Cherryvale, and then when you took on your first officer role, what do you remember most about making that transition into a leadership position? So going from being somebody, on the crew as one of the guys and gals working on that crew to now essentially being in charge. What was that like? And were there any things that hit you like a brick wall at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I remember being excited, right? The sense of a new responsibility, the sense of being able to at that time kind of form my own path and help myself progress. That was all very exciting. But right around the corner became I originally thought, like, how hard can this be? Right? I'm young in my career. How hard can this be? I'll just make some decisions and it'll be easy. I'll write some policies. This is no problem. Quickly learning that that is not as easy as it seems, and there's a lot of competing interests, and there's a lot of things to consider. And I had no formal leadership training in my first officer role, which is I think we talk, we'll probably get into at some point, but no formal training, no leadership training, no concepts of it, just what I had learned from other people that I had been around. And yeah, I thought, well, this can't be that difficult. Turns out it was pretty difficult.
Well, isn't it true that, as the saying goes, people always think that they can do their boss's job better than their boss, and then they get in that role, and it's a smack in the face that things are different than they perceived it, but then inevitably they think they can do their next boss's higher job better. And I think that just continues.
Yeah, I'm not sure what makes us forget that it's not as easy as it seems, but we do seem to fall in the trap about, oh, I can do my boss's job. I'd be doing it, 100 times better if I was in that position. Just give me a shot at it. And then you get in that seat and realize that there are a lot of things you hadn't realized and a lot of angles that you didn't view it from that make a difference to it.
Yep. Cool. So let's shift, if we could, to fast forward to 2021 and the Marshall Fire. So you've been on the job a while at that point. Probably if what, 30 years now. So we're looking at 15 plus, or 15, 25 plus at that point.
Sure.
Obviously a massive event here in Colorado, and anyone that has lived on the Front Range or beyond won't forget what went on at the end of 2021 with the Marshall Fire. Walk me through that day from the initial call that your department received and when you were rolled into that from your position. What was your perspective? What was going on through your mind, and how did you progress through that incident?
Yeah. Interesting day for sure. It actually started with a different fire that was north of the Marshall Fire that had potential to impact the fire district also. Both the chief and my peer, the other deputy chief, were out of town on vacation. I was actually technically on vacation, so I was at home. But we knew that I was the one in town for if anything had happened. I also had an acting battalion chief working underneath me for the day. So I made a phone call to him about that fire up north, Middle Fork fire, asked what his thoughts were. Looked like if it continued to burn, it would impact the district on the north side of our area, and what he had been doing. So through those discussions, I decided I should probably head into work and help out and make a plan in case we needed to do something. But as I was headed to work, the call for the Marshall Fire came in on the south side of the district. So I diverted and headed over there. And it started off as First arriving crew said they had a structure fire fully involved and they were working on it. So I went ahead and filled the alarm as we normally would. To get more resources there is what that means. We send a shorter alarm at the beginning until we confirm it, and then we send a larger, complete the alarm, and send the rest of the trucks after. So I'd done that, which starts bringing quite a bit of help. But things were definitely different as we got into the area. If you got into smoke, you couldn't see past the hood. The wind I hadn't seen wind like that in a long time, and soon would figure out we hadn't had a duration of wind like that in a long time too. So that was impactful also. So you could tell kind of early in that things were going to be different. And that meant we probably had to do some different stuff. Took a little bit to get used to that, but those were kind of the initial thoughts of it had been dry for months. It had been dry for 6 months. We hadn't seen any moisture. It had been warm. We hadn't seen any snow, any moisture, anything like that. And then this wind was actually a lot more than was predicted. We were predicted gusts into the 60, 80 mile an hour range, but we were getting sustained winds in the 80 mile an hour range with gusts well over 100.
So back to that initial call, when that first crew went out there, and if my memory serves, just looking at the map, there's not a whole lot out that way. I mean, there's some rolling terrain, a couple of structures out there. Did they initially, from that first call, know that, okay, this is going to be a big deal? Or did they say, okay, there may have been a brush fire here, or I don't know what they saw initially, but was it like this is going to need all of our resources from the get-go, or did that first crew have maybe a false sense of this isn't as big a deal as it turned out to be?
Well, I don't know if it was necessarily a false sense, but we've experienced wind on a regular basis, especially in December. It's one of our windiest months here. So that wasn't that unusual. The strength of the wind was a little unusual. But arriving with a working structure fire is not unusual for us either in a windy day. I don't think they realized until they actually got out and started trying to effect an attack on that structure that things were a little different. It was really windy. They got pinned down a little bit because of flying debris, and trying to make their way to the front door was difficult just because of wind and flames and smoke. So I think at that point, they started realizing that I can't even be outside and talk on the radio. Things are a little different today because it's so windy that, this is going to be a struggle.
I remember I was running errands that day. Was it a Saturday? I don't remember. I think it may have been a Saturday morning, if I remember correctly. So came out of the Napa parts store in Erie, and so I lived in the district at the time. And I remember looking to the south from Erie, and you could see the dark smoke, and it was moving across the horizon, pretty well. And I remember going home, and my wife said, we gotta turn on the news because there's a prepare to evacuate order for Erie. Not a full evacuation, but a prepare to evacuate order. And I remember thinking, not only is this a big deal, because I know the towns all around there, not quite reaching Erie, but those other towns were fully evacuating. And you go through your mind like, oh, wow, what do I take? What are the things that I have to think about that you take for granted sometimes, right? Where are the birth certificates and where are the passports, and what am I going to have time to take, or should I even consider taking versus, just leaving behind? So I remember that being a big deal. So once the multiple alarms happened and the multiple agencies all started chipping in, what was that like for you? Did you guys in Mountain View still have command at that point? And were you coordinating those agencies as they arrived on scene? Or what did it look like then?
Sure. Upon our first arrival and it being a structure fire, when I filled that initial alarm, that brings a battalion chief, and we share resources without borders with our neighboring agencies. So a neighboring agency battalion chief was first battalion chief on scene. And we had a brief discussion about what we were going to do. And he took the structure fire because that's his bread and butter. They work those on a regular basis. I don't. He started with what we thought was going to be command of a structure fire, and I was going to go kind of hand in hand there. He took command of the structure fire. Additional engines were reporting that there was a lot more fire spreading across the fields and into other things as they were arriving. So I went to go take a look and get some situational awareness around that. So unfortunately, that first battalion chief from the neighboring agency he remained in command.
Mm-hmm.
we worked side by side after I went and did some scouting and some evacuations. We joined back up and kind of regrouped a little bit, and we definitely knew we had our hands full.
And then I assume that after, or with time goes on and multiple alarms, and then realizing this is a big deal, at what point does the state get involved?
The state got involved fairly early in this one because of the size of it, right, and the impact that was going on there. They were there and involved within, I'd probably say, 3 hours. I was out in the field managing a division or an area. I was managing downtown Superior, trying to manage all the crews that were in that area. I wasn't back at the command post until early the next morning, or late that night, 2-ish in the morning is when I was able to make it over there when I got relief out on my divisions. But they got involved fairly early with this one just because of the scope of what was going on.
So looking back on it all in your own personal after action review, or whatever review you do to kind of look at things in hindsight, what were the big leadership lessons of that incident that stuck out to you? And not to sway your decision one way or another, but I remember an early conversation when we first met, and you and I have known each other for a few years now. But one of the earliest conversations we had, we were talking about how do you get and integrate all these units that are coming in. Some come in and take the initiative right away and start doing and wanting to do things. And sometimes that's a little misguided, right? They want to be involved, but it might not be in accordance with whatever plan there is. And then others show up and wait to be told what to do. And that, on one hand, can be good because then you're going to give them the information that they need to be successful and be integrated. But on the other hand, you need folks that can operate off of intent,
right,
and contribute right away.
Yeah.
So not that that's your answer here, but I remember that conversation and it stuck out to me. But what were the big leadership lessons, the
Well,
takeaways?
I think Mike Tyson said everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And the Marshall Fire was a punch to the face, because we have a pretty standard plan when we get working structure fires or grass fires and things like that, about assignments and command positions and safety positions. But the Marshall Fire it grew so quickly, it expanded so quickly that it's hard to keep your arms around it. And I think one of the first leadership lessons or things that came out of it was, trust your people. Trust your people to do the right thing. If you set the organization up for success before the big events, and training has gone well, and you have expectations set out there, and the leader's intent is out there, and it can be as simple as it was on this one, which was, life safety, property conservation, incident stabilization. And we never got out of the life safety issue for the first 12 hours of the incident. But I learned that people want to do good work. Nobody's out there wanting to do a bad thing at all. If you trust the people that they're out there to do good work starts to happen. A couple hours into it, 3 hours into it, I was saying some things like, I need you to enter this downtown area. And I would literally say, and do good work. Find something that'll make a difference and do it. And people understood what it meant, which was cool, right? I didn't have to be, a lot of times in the fire service, we're very meticulous about park here, pull this hose, advance this way, report back to me. And in this incident, I didn't need to. And it makes you start to wonder about, maybe it's better to let people just build them. I think we've talked about this in the past, the ditch banks, right? So you have each side of the ditch and let them fill the water in the middle, and great things happen when you do that. So that was a big leadership lesson out of there for me.
Yeah, I love that quote that you said from Mike Tyson about getting punched in the face and having a plan up until that point. We would often say in the military that the enemy has a vote in all our plans. And I assume in this case, the fire has a vote, a big one.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, the fire was a majority vote on this one, and the other big leadership lesson I learned, and there's a facilitated learning analysis that the Forest Service did for this, and it speaks to this in there, is having the ability, because at a certain point when the command and I were having a discussion, we decided that for everybody's safety, that we disengage. We were getting reports of fire trucks being, in danger of being burnt. Crews were in trouble. And so we made the call to get to safe areas and regroup and calm down for a second, and then re-engage with the life safety factor. So that's a big deal. And being a leader in that kind of situation, are you willing to make that call? Because typically when the fire department shows up, stuff gets better, right? We're there to help things get better. The fire starts to go out. People get, we start to get people to hospitals. Wasn't happening in the Marshall Fire. That fire was not going out when we first arrived. So are you willing to make the mind change? And can you make that mindset change to say, you know what, we need to back up and regroup and rethink this and try again and make sure everybody's safe. And that's more important right now than doing what we normally do, just trying to do it harder.
Yep. I'm reminded of a quote that I frequently use in a lot of my leadership classes. It's a quote from Hal Moore, who was famous from his involvement in Vietnam. He commanded a 7th Cavalry Battalion in the early days of Vietnam, his actions memorialized in the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and then subsequently in the Hollywood movie We Were Soldiers, where his role was played by Mel Gibson in that movie. So he would frequently say when he was trying to figure out how to gain an advantage in a situation, or in this case, gain an advantage over the enemy. And it resonates with me in a fire such as this, where you were talking about people understanding the intent and then doing something, doing good, using that initiative. He would say, what am I not doing that I should be doing? Thinking like sometimes you get frozen in indecision and you have to take an action, and thinking through what that action should be is vitally important. And then the second thing is, what am I currently doing that I shouldn't be doing? Because oftentimes we do feel that action is necessary, but it could be the wrong action. And if we only took a beat and thought about it for a second, we might figure out what the right thing to do is, rather than just doing for the sake of doing.
Sure.
And then the third thing is, how do I reconcile those two to then gain an advantage over the fire or gain an advantage over the enemy? So what am I not doing that I should be doing? What am I currently doing that I shouldn't be doing? And how do I reconcile those two to gain an advantage? And your story there about Marshall and all those units coming in and trying to give them the intent and allow them to do good work reminded me of what a great lesson that is for all of us as leaders, or just people just doing work, right? Often I sit here in my home office and I'm trying to figure out what the next thing I should be working on is. And I'm just reminded of Hal Moore's words there.
Yeah, I think it's great. I kind of liken that a little bit to what we'll call a tactical pause, where you take just a quick break to reevaluate what you got going on. Are we doing the right things? What do we need to be doing different? So I agree. It's a good leadership lesson there.
So let's shift a bit to your leadership philosophy and the topic of innovation for a second. So as I've gotten to know you and I've heard from others, you've got a reputation for pushing the envelope with innovation and wanting to keep at what you would call the on the bleeding edge of things, but while still maintaining the appropriate levels of risk mitigation. How do you balance encouraging the folks that work with you to think outside the box while making sure things don't go sideways?
Sure. Well, I think the first step is setting the expectation, right? And that can happen at the organizational level, where you're setting the mission of the organization, so we all know where we're driving to, so people have a feeling of where they can go and where if they want to be innovative and do something different, it should point in this general direction. I think that's important. And then a culture of learning from failure is a big deal. You can't have people being, penalized for failure. It can't be punitive. You want to learn from it. Now, obviously, there's these cases where repeated mistakes, where we've tried to learn lessons and it doesn't happen, things like that, you have to deal with them. But that shouldn't be your first inkling is that you're going to go write somebody up, or you really want to dig in and evaluate that through AARs, through discussions, and then make people comfortable with failure is a big deal. It's difficult to do. It takes a lot of time to do it. But if you can build a culture of learning from failure instead of fear from failure, I think that really lets people drive innovation and do different things, but understanding that there is this kind of mission and this vision of where we want to head, and that's the North Star for us, so they try to keep it on the road there.
Yep. We would often in the military use John Maxwell's term, fail forward. As long as your failure's okay, as long as you're learning something from that failure. If you're just failing for the sake of failing and you're not learning and you're just repeating that over and over, like you said, that's not good. But if you find a nugget or a lesson of that thing that you stumbled on and didn't do so quite so well, you're going to be better off for it in the end. But
Yeah.
if your culture in your department is that you say, I want you to try things, I want you to take initiative, I want you to potentially make mistakes as long as you learn from them, but then you lop people's heads off for those failures, it's not going to stick and no one will believe you, right? They have to have trust when you say that I believe in you to do good work here. And often there's going to be lessons learned and we're going to improve upon those lessons, but you start, like you say, writing people up immediately as the immediate first action. That's not going to take.
Yeah. And recently we've been having quite a bit of discussion around Fire Academy and how does that work in with learning from failure and ensuring that we're instilling that early on in academy. Because it's easy in academy to say, nope, you did it wrong. Go run laps, go run
Hmm.
tower laps, go push the world down until you can't push it down anymore. And is that really the right path that we want to take right out of the get-go? Or do we want to, explore why we failed, learn a lesson from it, go try it again and keep moving and making progression? Or do you just want to send them out for PT because they couldn't quite get their bunker gear on fast enough? So we've been having discussions around that and trying to make sure that we're aligned from the time you get hired through the time you make leadership and that we're giving the right message all the way through.
That's such an interesting point you make because as you were saying, I was reflecting on the military. We say the same thing, right? Fail forward, failure is good as long as you're learning those lessons. But basic training isn't like that. And I assume the fire academy isn't like that. And you are getting your head ripped off and chewed out or whatever term you want to use for making those mistakes. Now, I get while some of that is conditioned learning, right? You have to be able to overcome some of those things and it become embedded within you that this is what we do. And some of that are those hard lessons learned through muscle failure, doing push-ups. But you're right? What if we change the dynamic from the very beginning and we taught you that these aren't just hollow words, that we are going to bring you along in a way that makes you much better off in the end.
Yeah, it's
That's
really
a
hard to
great
make all
point.
of a sudden a gear change at the end of academy where all of a sudden now you're done and now you come on the line and you say, well, now this is how we're really going to try to operate, right? But I've conditioned you for 16 weeks or 18, even 20 weeks of stand up, sit down, don't fail. But now it's okay to fail and we'll talk about it. We'll try to learn from it. It's hard to make that change.
Yeah. So speaking of bringing our people along, let's talk about the fire or the people side of leadership. So you operate in a very mission-centered industry, and I did as well in the military, where we would say the mission is of the utmost importance, right? And it made sense, right? You were deployed in the military, you're deployed to a wartime environment and you're doing things where lives are at risk and the mission of whatever we were trying to accomplish was paramount. And you, with the mission of saving lives and property, that mission is paramount as well. How do you balance that mission and being mission focused with the people side of leadership? If we convince ourselves that the mission is of utmost importance and that is paramount, maybe we might forget that the people are our business as leaders, and we might then start to treat them, unfortunately, as expendable resources, right? Like, hey, you got to come along to this thought that the mission is of importance. And if I treat you poorly, that's just part of it. And you know what you signed up for when you took on this role. Therefore, that gives me as a leader, unfortunately, if I'm a toxic leader or a bad leader, that gives me a quasi permission to treat you poorly. What do you think?
The more that I learn about leadership and I strive to learn about it every week, the more it becomes clear to me that relationships are paramount. Like you have to build good relationships, and you can't treat people like commodity if you want to have a good relationship. And through having a good relationship, and which starts to build trust, and you can do that through. There's all sorts of things that go into a relationship. There's a ton of stuff that come from them. But one of the things is, if I have a great relationship with you and you're leading me, I'll go to the mat for you, right? I'll push the extra mile. I'll go without a meal. I'll take the next assignment because I know that we have this relationship and I understand you and you understand me. And you wouldn't be asking me to do things if they weren't absolutely critical to get done. And so for me, that's how I've started to view this relationship versus mission. And if I can focus and improve my relationships, it's only going to improve my mission, carrying out my mission. Because like I said, people will go the extra mile because we have a great relationship, and you know, and I know that you'll take care of me and I'll take care of you in times of need. And I understand where you're coming from and you understand where I'm coming from. So I think trying to focus on that relationship is a big deal. And if you can get that mind switch kind of flipped in your head a little bit as a leader, that relationship's super important. I think you can get a better outcome on the mission.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that needs care and feeding and constant attention and training on what it really means to have people and leadership as being a relationship with your team members. Too often in professions like ours, we rely, unfortunately, on the rank on our collars as the thing that drives leadership. So as a lieutenant, if I tell you this is what you need to do, I have that power of my rank behind me for you to do the thing, and I don't really have to worry about nurturing that relationship. I think we all would benefit from, and I get why the rank is there, and I'm not trying to
For sure.
diminish that at all
Right.
in a hierarchical organization like the fire service or like the military. But if we condition ourselves to lead in a way where the rank didn't exist,
Mm-hmm.
or that didn't matter and it was only the relationship that we had to fall back on, I think that would benefit us
Yeah,
extremely well.
I think so.
Let's talk about buzzwords for a second. And I've
Okay.
known you, like I said, for a couple of years, and you're not a fan of buzzwords. I think you do appreciate the meaning of the terms behind the buzzwords, but when people throw things around just to sound a certain way or because they think that that's what they're supposed to say, that tends to, I think, in your eyes, be something that gets annoying. What are some buzzwords that make you roll your eyes and cringe?
Yeah, I think the current one is that term, be a vulnerable leader, vulnerability part. And I get what it's about. I agree with the concept of it. Uh, so that one's tough, right? Especially in an industry where being vulnerable hasn't always been viewed as a good thing, and it can mean so many different things to different people. Sometimes it loses its impact, and that's probably why I don't like that word. And I would probably replace it with, risk management or tolerance, risk tolerance or risk management on a personal level. So something we do, and it's more relatable for me in my position. Something we do every day is we manage risk. And so for me to be vulnerable, I'm just managing the amount of risk I'm willing to take individually as a leader. So when I talk to someone about being vulnerable or being open to feedback and being open to failure and being open to all these things, being vulnerable to it, I'm really asking them to manage their risk, and I'm asking them to change their risk tolerance level to be able to do that. And so if I can communicate in those words and those words that we typically use in our industry throughout each day, it tends to stick a little bit better and it hangs that framework a little clearer for people. Or as if I come in with the word vulnerable, I'll get a lot of eye rolls sometimes, or like, what are you talking to me? Like, I don't understand what you mean by that word. So that's one of the words that is a
So
little.
to be clear, you're not saying that you have an issue with people embodying those attributes and those traits of vulnerability, or in your words, managing risk. You would like them to be those type of firefighters and those type of people in your ranks. It's just the constant use of the word being thrown around without anything behind it.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with the concepts and implementing those into our leadership style. But and it's a part of it is take a little bit of something and make it your own. And by making your own, maybe you change the term of it a little bit. As long as you're getting the message across and the concepts, I think that's okay.
Okay. So let's practice a little vulnerability here then. Let's talk more about you, which I assume is a little bit vulnerable. You've got a background and your degree is in organizational leadership and development. I
Yeah.
know some of the attitude here in the United States has been changing the last couple of years with higher education and what the worthwhileness of that is. And maybe that's more on undergraduate education. But from your perspective, what has your education in leadership done for you and your ability to lead in the fire service? Has it been value added, or has it been a thing that you did because you knew it would help you get promoted? Not to put words in your mouth, but I
Yeah,
just,
no, I actually didn't do it because to help me be promoted. I did it to be better at what I do. And from that, the formal education part for me has been confidence building. right? It's bringing concepts to my beliefs so I understand them better and they're clearer for me. And when I have that ability to be confident and understand kind of the background and the motivators of what people do and why they do them and what helps lead them, I can be more transparent and supportive in my leadership because I'm confident in it. So if someone wants to ask a question why, I can answer those questions. So I think that's what it's done for me is been able to make me more transparent, more supportive. And to tie back the last question, I'm willing to adjust my risk tolerance to be that more vulnerable, open to feedback, talk about lessons learned, talk about myself, where I've been, where I want to go. And that, from my position in my organization, has a bigger impact than me just grabbing a hold of formal concepts and trying to implement them, right? Like I learned, that this is the progression to get organizational alignment and we're going to push forward and do that. Well, it's useful, but the big takeaway for me from my formal education was it built my confidence to be able to lead better, which has had an impact on the organization. I hope it's had an impact on the organization. And I think that's the big takeaway from it. The more you know about something, the more comfortable you are about it, the better you can be about it and discuss it. And then I can sit down with my peers or my team and have meaningful discussions about what we want to do as leaders. And we can back those up with different concepts and thoughts. And that really makes a difference.
Right. And I think that one of the most important thinking on, as I do teach in higher education, I always encourage my students, don't just take this piece of content, this book chapter or this article or this video that I'm assigning you as ground truth. I want you to digest it using your own critical thought process. And if you don't like it and it doesn't resonate with you, then figure out why and think about that. I don't want you to say, well, Eric assigned me this thing, therefore it has to be true. And I assume that you have picked that up along the way as well. Like you're filtering everything that you're learning through your degree and continued education through that critical eye. And you're saying, why does this resonate with me or not? And that really fuels you as a more well-rounded leader.
Yeah. No, it makes a good difference for it. And like I said, the deeper discussions you can have, it allows you to kind of, filter out what works, what doesn't work. And then also realize that, not everything works in every situation, and you have to adjust your style to the person or the organization or the situation you're in. And just gathering that knowledge behind it makes a difference to be able to do that.
So speaking of content that you've come across in your continued education and lifelong learning, are there any pieces of content, particular books or concepts or ideas that you've come across that you're like, man, this is it, not it as the end all be all, but this is something I really got to use and I really love?
Yeah, I think there's a couple pieces. You introduced me to the self-evaluation about learning ourselves better and taking that. That's a great piece of, that's a great tool. I think that a lot of leadership should be able to open themselves up to and take a good look at themselves. So that's the first one that I think I'm glad I have it and use it. Like I said, I'm always trying to keep learning about leadership because you always pick something up every day. And if you're not learning something every day, we should think about what we're doing. But the latest book I read that I kind of it touched with me was called Turn the Ship Around. It's a story about a submarine, a submarine captain that picks up kind of a boat, a submarine that's struggling compared to the rest of them in the fleet, and turns that around and talks about becoming, from follower to leader, and kind of what we talked about, trusting in your people and pushing decision-making to the appropriate levels and giving people the freedom to make some choices. That's all kind of discussed in this book. And I think it's a good illustrative example of being able to do that.
Nice. Certainly a good one. A little disappointed, though, that you didn't mention A Leader with Vision, best-selling book by Eric Savickas. It could have been one high on your list, but we won't hold that against you.
It is an excellent book, and I appreciate that one too. It speaks to the ability to give someone an expectation and let them carry it out, which is a great thing. And I'm a big proponent of that too.
See, that was a setup right there. All right. As we start to wrap things up here, I know you're busy and you got a lot going on. If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice about leadership, what would that be?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I've been thinking about it because there's so many things I wish I knew when I first got into leadership. Like I said, I had no formal training on it. And I think one of the key pieces of advice I would go back and give myself is learn about it. Start early and learn about it. Get, however that is, leadership coach, reading books, going to school for it, getting a trusted mentor. Find someone that can teach you early about what they experienced or in leadership and start trying to apply those lessons earlier. I waited for a while and it makes the road much more bumpy and harder to do. So learn about it early and then never stop learning that way. Always be learning about leadership. There's always something different, always something new. Talk to as many different people as you can about it. Get as much coaching, get as many mentors, do all those things. That's the big thing. When I started, I thought, right, I said, how hard can this be? I'm going to make some decisions. I'm going to write some policies. And people may not like everything I do, but you always subscribe to that. Like you can't make everybody happy, which is true. It's difficult to make everybody happy. But if you learn it early in, man, it would have smoothed the way for me a long way out, a long time ago. And that would have been,
Certainly. Okay, last question here. What's got you fired up about the fire service? What's the next big thing that you see for leadership and innovation in the fire service?
man, what a great question. But obviously technology is a big deal that's coming in, and that's going to be a big thing in innovation for the fire services. AI, drone technology, all those things. But that's kind of the technical side of the house. What's got me fired up is I'm starting to recognize, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, at least in my circles in the fire service, is this discussion about leadership. I think it's a big deal. And we've, historically we've gone through that kind of, like you said, we're mission driven. And so the person that's, you generally get promoted and there's not a lot of discussion about leadership and leading people and relationships and how to manage those. And it's starting to break loose and it's starting to come to the forefront. And I think there's a big thirst for it in the fire service right now. You're starting to see different articles and some different classes starting to creep out. So I think that's pretty exciting that we're joining modern times with some leadership theory and trying to implement that into our systems.
Awesome. Well, Sterling, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your incredible insights and experiences about leadership. Your story, your personal story, is a powerful example of leadership for anyone in the fire service or beyond. For those listening, if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your team or anyone that you think might benefit from this content. Don't forget to subscribe to Convergent Impact Leadership Podcast and leave a review. If it helps others discover these valuable conversations and discussions about leadership, that's all that really matters. For more tools and insights to support your leadership journey, visit convergentimpact.com. And until next time, lead well, take care of your people, and keep setting the example.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.